Hi, I'm Indie Tiger. Welcome back to my channel, Indie Tiger's Sci-Fi Review. And tonight we'll be discussing my thoughts on 2001: A Space Odyssey. Spoiler warnings: if you haven't seen the movie, go ahead and watch it and come back to this after. The plot of the movie is, in my opinion, actually four movies or four vignettes. The first is The Dawn of Man, the second is on the space station and on the moon, the third is on board the spaceship Discovery heading towards Jupiter, and the fourth is the evolution of one of the astronauts on board the Discovery. So the movie begins with a sunrise. Sunrise on Earth as seen from the moon. And we meet a group of primates. This is several thousand or hundreds of thousands of years ago, and they are a small band or group or family of primates, and they are barely able to survive. They are living in a very arid environment, and they have access to a watering hole. You can see how big that watering hole is, and they're barely able to survive in this environment. In fact, I think this watering hole scene is key to at least one of the themes of the movie, which we will be discussing later. As you can see, they are prone to attack by predators. This leopard pouncing on the unsuspecting primate, and they are prone to attack by other primates, which another group of primates drives them away from the watering hole, and they're really struggling. As we see the monolith for the first time, it is sunrise, and we see the moon in the distance. And the monolith seems to be powered by the sun itself. So we see this first shot of the monolith, and there's the sun rising and the moon in the background. And the group of primates that are really struggling to survive find the monolith, and they interact with it. First, they're scared of it, and then one of them gets brave and starts to touch it. He almost touches it, and he almost touches it, and he's jumping back and forth, and he finally touches it. And then the rest of them get more brave, and they start to interact with it. And as a result, the primates that interact with the monolith learn the use of tools for the first time. And the tools that they're using are bone tools, and they use it to hunt so they get better food. They use it to drive off and even kill some of the other primate group. And we're not told whether they're taught violence or whether they're just taught the use of tools. Either way, they are using stone tools. Then there's this time skip, and it's the greatest time skip of all time because it takes us into the modern era, and the transition is probably one of the best in cinema history, because as the primates are celebrating their victory, one of the primates throws a bone up in the air. You can see the bone here, and it's kind of shaped like a dumbbell. And the next scene is a satellite or spaceship, and it's shaped similarly, and they're both moving in similar fashion. So it's probably one of the best scenes in the movie, and it's a transition from ancient days to the modern era of around 1999. As we follow what's going on in space, we see a space station, and it's rotating in space to produce artificial gravity. And there is a Pan Am space plane getting ready to dock with it. And after the space plane docks, we see Dr. Haywood Floyd is on board the space plane, and he meets with some Russians. And Dr. Haywood Floyd is the head of the American Space Agency, and he's offered a chance to have a drink with the Russians so they can talk about what's going on at the American moon base called Clavius. And he declines the drink, but he's in search of food. He's going in search of breakfast, but he has a few minutes conversation. The Russians accuse Dr. Floyd of knowing something about a plague or an epidemic on Clavius base because one of their own ships that was in distress on the moon was denied access to Clavius, and that goes against international space treaty. But Dr. Floyd avoids the questions, and he declines the drink, and then he goes off, and he ends up on Clavius. And on Clavius, he's talking to several other scientists who have discovered something on the moon called, in the book, it's called the Tychomagnetic Anomaly. And the Tychomagnetic Anomaly is another monolith that was buried under the crater of Tycho. The book and the movie were written concurrently. Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick worked together hand in hand. Arthur C. Clarke is writing the book. Stanley Kubrick is making the movie at the same time. There's some collaboration, not complete collaboration, because as you read the book and you watch the movie, there's differences. Because Stanley Kubrick doesn't want to give away everything to Arthur C. Clarke that he's trying to accomplish in the movie. Haywood Floyd has a briefing with the scientists who discovered the Tychomagnetic Anomaly, and then they go to visit it to Tycho, and this spaceship is called the Moon Bus, and it's just for short hops on the moon. As they reach it, the moon is still in night, and they have reached the excavation. You can see that they have excavated it, and they have what appears to be camera equipment. And when the sun, as they're looking at it and talking about it, the sun rises over the moon, and the Tychomagnetic Anomaly, this second monolith, sends out a signal to Jupiter, and it's picked up on their suits, on their radio sets in their space suits, and apparently it's very painful, but it's able to be tracked to Jupiter. In a second time skip, we see the Discovery. It's now 18 months later, and this is when I believe the 2001 part starts, is on board the Discovery, because this is the Odyssey part of the Space Odyssey. And we meet the crew of the Discovery. The crew of the Discovery consists of astronauts Frank Poole, played by Gary Lockwood, and Dave Bowman, played by Keir Dullea, and HAL 9000, which is an artificial intelligence. And they're not sure whether he actually is sentient or not, but there is a very clever interview that introduces us to the crew of the Discovery, and that's how we learn who they are and their names, and that Hal is potentially sentient or not. At least he acts sentient. And as they're going through this interview process, it's kind of a flashback to the interview before they go. And it's mentioned that there are also another team of scientists who are in hibernation for the long trip out to Jupiter. And they are the investigative team. And Frank Poole and Gary Mitchell, Frank Poole and Dave Bowman don't know what the true intention of the mission is. It turns out that Dave Bowman finds out later. So, but they begin to suspect Hal as being Hal is an artificial intelligence, and they've had HAL 9000 computers for a while, and they never make mistakes. That's the reputation of the HALs. Now, HAL stands for, at least in the book, heuristic algorithm, and it does not, in my mind, it is not a play on IBM. IBM is one letter different from HAL, so you go up one letter to get the H. From I, you go up one letter from B to A, and you go up one letter from M to L, you get HAL. But to me, that's not the case. It's heuristic algorithm. So it's a learning computer. It can learn. That's what heuristic means. It can learn based on experience. And Hal, it's later on revealed that Hal knows what the true mission is of the statement. And he's beginning to act strangely. And Dave Bowman and Frank Poole begin to suspect there's something wrong with Hal. And Hal is taking care of the hibernated astronauts, and he takes care of certain environmental controls on the ship, and he can control the EVA pods, and so on and so forth. And Hal predicts that there will be a malfunction in the antenna that points back to Earth in the next 72 hours, and these guys are out there all alone. They have several hours before they can get communication to and from Earth. So they have to record a message to Earth, transmit it, wait hours to get back a reply because they're so far away from Earth. And they go out in the EVA pod and they replace the antenna unit, and then they start testing it, and they find nothing wrong with it. And Hal decides that there must be human error because they can't find anything wrong with the unit. And Hal begins to suspect that these guys are on to him. He's acting out of character. He's basically lying to them. And Hal cooks up a plan to kill off Frank Poole when he goes out a second time to replace the antenna unit with the original so that they can see if it actually will fail in the predicted time frame that Hal gives them. And then once he kills Frank Poole, he then goes after the crew as Dave Bowman goes out to rescue Frank Poole. And Dave Bowman, through his own inattentiveness or his own urgency, he leaves in a pod to save Frank, but he doesn't take his helmet for his spacesuit with him, and he has to get back on board Discovery, but Hal won't let the pod doors open, and Frank has to use an emergency access to enter the ship. And Frank Poole is let go because he can't get through the emergency escape hatch with Frank Poole in the way, so he has to let Frank go. And when he enters Hal's higher brain function room, we see these sort of lucite tablets that are Hal's primary brain functions, and he can keep Hal working at a level of basic ship maintenance, but destroy Hal's brain functions, his higher brain functions. And as he's doing so, it's revealed in a video by Haywood Floyd that the real mission is to go out and find out what's going on in Jupiter, because they don't know what the Tycho-magnetic anomaly sent a message to, but it was directed towards Jupiter. And so Frank is dead. Hal is now disabled. He can run the ship systems, but he can't think, and he can't plot. He can't plot the death of the other crewmates. The scientists are dead because Hal killed them while Dave Bowman was out trying to save Frank, and that leaves Dave Bowman alone in Jupiter orbit to find out whatever's going on. And when he gets there, there's another monolith in orbit, and it's the largest one yet. And it turns out that it's a Stargate. And the Stargate is a transportation device that sends Dave Bowman on a trip. And the movie, it's hard to tell what's happening. The book explains it much better. And so when you see this scene of Dave Bowman, you just know that he's going through a Stargate system, and it's a transit system that spans maybe even galaxies, and it's really messing with his brain a little bit as he's going, because it's such an experience outside of his normal everyday life, even as advanced as he is as an astronaut, and the advancements of the human race in the several 100,000 years since the dawn of man. And eventually he reaches a hotel room where it's a replica of a neoclassic hotel room. That's what I've read. That's in the French style, the French Renaissance style of Louis XVI. That's what the furniture is. And the artwork is not anything famous, although it looks like, according to what my research has told me, is it's Rococo style art. Now, I took art history a long time ago, and what I remember of Rococo style art is that it came out in around the 1500s, and it is full of unnecessary detail. So everything is detailed. It's almost like today we have photorealistic paintings, but everything is realistic, even down to the non-essentials of the painting in Rococo style artwork. Not just the important parts like Napoleon or whatever. So that is what I remember from art history, and it seems to be sort of important here as we get into this. We'll talk about that more as well. So as we look at this room, Dave Bowman is exploring the room first in his spacesuit, and then he removes his spacesuit and he ages in the room. And as he ages in the room, he is eating, he is showering, he's changed his clothes into clothes that were there for him in this hotel room. And so there's something that is, to me, something that I didn't ever see before. Let's move back to the Stargate. Something that I never noticed before. And the reason I'm doing this now is because I got a chance to see this in a movie theater. Which, if you always want to see things in the movie theater. these classic movies come out in places like Angelica Theater in the United States. There's a few of those around, like in Los Angeles and Texas, here in the DC area and New York. This one I got to see at the Alamo Cinema Draft House, and I watched it and I paid particular attention to it because I was hoping for a similar experience that I had when I watched Forbidden Planet at the Angelica Theater last year, where I would see fascinating details that I never picked up before. Well, I didn't get quite that same experience, but I did pick up on what I believe is a theme of the movie. Now, this movie is dense on theme, so I know I'm not picking up everything, and other people have said this is what the movie's about. And other people have said, well, no, this is what the movie's about. There's a lot of theme to this, and I'm going to talk to you about what I picked up on, and it's not comprehensive. And so what I picked up on is, remember, I told you the watering hole scene is probably important. Well, the watering hole scene is mirrored by the Russians on the space station. But instead, we have two sides now that they're still antagonistic somewhat towards one another, but they are at least capable of sitting down and having a drink together. Whereas in the watering hole scene, the original primates that interact with the monolith are driven off by another group of primates. So it's kind of a twinning of the original scene, except this one is, while they're still antagonistic towards each other, at least we can get together superficially and sit down and have a drink and have a polite conversation. Well, that seems to me to be pretty important to the movie, at least in what I've seen, because of the fact that they're always eating or drinking in the movie. Haywood Floyd comes up to the space station and he is offered food. And the food that he is offered is in closed containers, and it's pureed, and it has to be basically drunk through a straw. And there's peas and carrots. Now, peas and carrots are synonymous in the United States with baby food. And so I think that part of the message here is that we are still in our infancy. At least I think that's my interpretation, because they're constantly eating in this movie. And we see that the first food that's served has to be sucked out through a straw, just like a baby, who is nursing from his mother. You are drinking your food. You're not actually eating anything. As the movie progresses, we see that on the moon bus, Dr. Floyd is offered a sandwich. And it's implied that the meat in the sandwich, it's chicken or ham or whatever. It's implied that it's not real chicken or ham, but it keeps getting better. The food just keeps getting better, and which is true. If you're going from food that is pureed and has to be drunk from a straw, especially fish, because who wants fish puree? I don't know. I certainly wouldn't want to drink my fish. But there is fish there. That's what that picture is on the left-hand side. So you're getting better food on the moon. And so as we see it, as the movie progresses, the food gets better. And as I say, they're constantly eating. Here on board Discovery, we see the astronauts eating, and the food has gotten better still. Sandwiches are held. You can hold a sandwich in your hand. It stays relatively together. So it's not as good. Children eat sandwiches. So I think that's part of the theme. Here we see the food has gotten a little bit better still. Now they're eating from open containers with a knife and a fork, and they're drinking from open containers. So we can see that the food has gotten a little bit better. So I think that's part, as I say, I think that's part of the message of the movie, is that we are still children as we move out into space. And as we get to the hotel room, the food gets even better. And we see that in the hotel room, there are some what look to be classical paintings. I'm told they're not, or I've read that they're not, except for a few of them that may be actual classical paintings. Obviously, they're reproductions, they're not the real thing. Interestingly enough, on the left-hand side, we see a woman holding an apple in her hand, and she's nude. And to me, that is probably Eve offering Adam the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So it's not a real painting, or it's not a famous painting, but it is in a classical style called Rococo art. And as I say, Rococo art is about pastoral scenes, and it's in the French style of Rococo art, and it's also unnecessary detail. So as we see on the left-hand side, as I say, I think that's supposed to be Eve offering Adam the apple, which leads to the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And then we see on the right-hand side this other naked woman who has these two animals in front of her. Her arms are cut off. She doesn't have arms. So it could be a nod to Venus. As we see in sculptures, there's Venus without arms. And so it could be a nod to that. So beauty is part of the theme, and food seems to be a big part of the movie in my mind. And as we see, Dave Bowman is living in this hotel room after he's passed through the Stargate, and he ages. And he's eating real food at this point. So the food has gotten better still, to where he's actually eating real food with fine cutlery and cut glass or crystal water glass. And this is Dave's Last Supper, which to me is very telling, because his last act as a human being reflects the beginning of the movie of the watering hole. He's drinking water from a glass. And as he puts the glass down, and as he's reaching for something else, he knocks it off the table and the glass breaks. And he looks over the side of the table as if he doesn't recognize what the glass is, or what the water is, or what its necessity is. This is his last act as a human being. Now, there is one more scene in the hotel room of him dying, and the monolith shows up, and he becomes the Star Child. And so, to me, I think that the food scenes are very important as one of the themes of the movie. Now, before I get into my final thoughts, I want to take a moment to look at a couple of things. And the first one is the leopard pouncing on the primate again. And I thought about this today as I was putting the video together, because it seems very reminiscent of another movie that of Forbidden Planet. And so here we see a tiger pouncing, and Commander Adams has to kill the tiger with his ray gun. So I thought that was pretty interesting. As I understand it, Forbidden Planet is very influential in the world of science fiction, especially in movies. And so these two scenes together seem to be Stanley Kubrick has taken inspiration from this scene to create this scene potentially. I could be off on that. I could be way off, but it certainly seems like it. So, moving into my final thoughts on the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. Well, we see food playing a part. The watering hole scene bookends very nicely with Dave Bowman's last act of knocking over the water glass, and it breaks, and he's looking at it and he doesn't understand what it is. Because after the watering hole scene of the primates, and the primates are taught by the monolith, then the end scenes of the movie are Dave Bowman not understanding what water is, potentially not understanding what food is, because he's been transformed, he's been evolved by the unseen aliens of the movie, and he is no longer needs food or water. And the final scene is that of the Star Child returning to Earth, and that's the movie. So it's interesting to me because what it seems like Stanley Kubrick is saying, at least in part, is that we are still children. We are still infants, and we still need things like food and water. And the fact that it's baby food to start with, and then it's food that children would eat for the most part. Like I say, it's sandwiches. And then it gets a little better. It's still kind of baby food, but it's being eaten from open containers with knife and fork. And the whatever liquid they're drinking is in an open-topped container, not having to be sipped through a straw. And the final scenes of the movie where Dave Bowman is eating a proper meal at a proper table with fine silverware and a fine chalice or glass, seems to me to be him saying, we can grow up. We can become adults. But right now, we're probably still in our infancy. And that is very true in a lot of senses to me. It makes sense to me that that's one of the themes, and it's still true today. One of the things that they have in the movie is HAL 9000. He's an artificial intelligence. And in the book, the 9000 series have been around since the 1990s, and the movie is set in 2001. The last movie, the last vignette, is set in 2001, and there is artificial intelligence introduced to us. Well, we've seen artificial intelligence begin to evolve on our planet now. So even though it's a little later than what 2001 has said by about 30 years, we see it happening. And in space, we see other things happening where we're beginning to grow out of our infancy in terms of technology in space. So it's very inspiring that we're seeing this now in the 2020s, because we have things like ion drives where they can't lift you off from the planet, but you can use a small amount of propellant to get you going once you're in space, and you can have continuous thrust to get you to your destination. So these ion engines are different than what we went to the moon with in the 1960s. In the 1960s, we thrust into orbit, and then we added some more thrust, and we stopped the engines, and we coasted to the moon. And then when we got to the moon, we went into orbit around the moon, and we landed on the moon with a small amount of thrust, and we took off from the moon with a small amount of thrust. But everything else was done by gravity. We used gravity to get us to the moon in a few days and get us home in a few days. And we did it several times, and it's a real accomplishment, especially back in the 1960s. But now we have these ion engines where we can at least start to accelerate small payloads and continuously operate the engine. So it will build up over time a large thrust vector, which to me is just amazing. Not only have we got that, but hopefully in 2024, Americans will land on the moon yet again and start to colonize the moon, or at least start to build habitats on the moon for extended missions. And we have done things, other pie in the sky things from the 1960s, like we've landed on an asteroid, and we've sampled an asteroid, and we've impacted an asteroid as well to change its course. And we have visited a comet, and we visited all of the planets in the solar system, and we have an observatory in space. We have several observatories in space: Hubble Space Telescope, James Webb Telescope. There's Cora, which is coronal emissions or something. I can't quite remember. We have all these things in space to help us learn more about space. So we're moving out of our infancy in space slowly but surely. And it's very inspiring. And I think that to me is an amazing thing. We have things to look forward to. And we have something hopeful to look forward to if we can just move out of our infancy, if we can just finally, as a species, get together and work together and forget all these differences to move away from conflict. Our next global conflict could be the end of the human civilization as we know it because of nuclear power. But if we can move away from conflict, if we can just get together and work together as a single species, how great would it be? How much money would we all have that we're pouring into our military today that we could use for other things? We have, I don't want to talk about anything in particular. As well as I do, some of the conflicts that are there and some of the conflicts that are potentially looming. I don't even want to say that they are looming, but there's potential there. And it could be devastating. Let's move away from it. Let's just find a way to cooperate as a human species, and maybe by 2010 or 2061 we will be out by Jupiter, and we will be having spaceships like the Discovery, and we will be moving out towards the stars and having colonies on the moon and on Mars, and moving further out from our cradle. Anyway, those are my final thoughts. If you like this video, please hit the like button. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Comment. Give me your thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I love to interact with you guys. My last video on why we need Captain Kirk more than ever is over 1,200 views. which this is the first video I've gotten that has over 1,000 views. So thank you all very much for that, your support, your kind words. I really appreciate it. And if you really like this, watch some of my other videos and share them out to your friends and family. With that, I am out. Have a great evening, day, whatever, and we will see you the next time.